You're a useless nobody, Samuel. My daughter deserves better. My name is Samuel Hayes, and I'm 37 years old. For the past 12 years, I've been running a private equity firm in Denver, Colorado, placing bets on investments most people wouldn't even notice. I operate through shell corporations, discrete trusts, and holding entities that bury my name in layers of documents so thick even the sharpest attorneys need months to unravel it. That's how I prefer it. Quiet, unseen, influential. But standing in my father-in-law's kitchen, watching him brandish his coffee mug like he's leading a symphony of insults, I felt anything but influential. Robert Kellerman had been labeling me a failure for 3 years straight. Every family gathering, every holiday, every time I stepped into his home. She could have married Dr. Patterson's boy, he said, pointing at my wife, Alina. Instead, she chose you, a man who can't even explain what he does for a living. Alina sat at the breakfast table, pushing her eggs around her plate. She didn't look up, didn't speak. Just kept moving those eggs like they held the solution to all the cracks in our marriage. Samuel works in finance, Dad, she murmured eventually, still avoiding my gaze. Finance, Robert sneered. That's meaningless. Could be peddling life insurance for all we know. Could be handling other people's savings in some rundown office park. I watched him circle his granite kitchen island, his face growing redder with each step. This was Robert Kellerman, founder and CEO of Nexora Labs, a biotech company that hadn't turned a real profit in 4 years. He'd inherited wealth from his father's construction empire and thought it made him a financial mastermind. What Robert didn't know was that I'd been monitoring his company's financials for 8 months. Nexora Labs was bleeding money, burning through the last of its venture capital. They needed a lifeline. They needed exactly the kind of silent investor I excelled at being. You sit there like a statue, Robert snapped, jabbing a finger at me. Real men speak out. Real men stand up for themselves. I nodded slowly. You're right, Mr. Kellerman. The kitchen fell silent. Alina finally glanced up from her plate, her expression puzzled. Even Robert seemed thrown off by my agreement. I am right, he said, his tone wavering now. Completely, I replied, standing and grabbing my coat. Alina deserves better. I walked toward the front door, their stares burning into my back. As I reached for the knob, I heard Alina's chair scrape against the floor. Samuel, wait. But I was already outside, breathing the crisp November air, knowing everything was about to shift. I met Alina 5 years ago at a conference in Boulder. She was delivering a talk on gene therapy advancements, brilliant and driven in her role at a small biotech firm. I was there scouting potential investments in the medical tech space. I hadn't expected to fall for the speaker. Our relationship moved quickly, too quickly, maybe. Within 18 months, we were married in a modest ceremony that her father grumbled about for weeks. He wanted something grander, flashier, something to impress his country club crowd. But Alina and I liked simplicity, or so I thought. The trouble began during our first Christmas as a married couple. Robert had too much wine and started grilling me about my work. I gave him the same vague responses I gave everyone. Private investments, asset management, advising high-net-worth clients. All true, but omitting the key fact that I was the high-net-worth client. My firm, Amberlin Ventures, oversaw more than $200 million in assets. We focused on early-stage investments in tech and medical startups, the kind of deals that demanded secrecy and discretion. I'd built my reputation by staying in the shadows, letting others take the spotlight while I quietly reaped returns most investors could only dream of. But Robert saw my discretion as cowardice. He began making jabs about my secretive job, saying a real man would be more open about his work. Alina would redirect the conversation or brush it off, but she never told him to stop, never defended me. The verbal attacks grew sharper over the months. Robert mocked my clothes, my car, my lack of drive. He'd compare me to other men in their social circle, successful surgeons and attorneys who flaunted expensive cars and bragged about their accomplishments. What stung most was watching Alina retreat during these confrontations. The bold scientist I'd married became quiet and submissive, always excusing her father's behavior. She'd pull me aside after particularly harsh dinners, whispering apologies and promising things would improve, but she never challenged him directly. 3 months ago, I stumbled across something that changed everything. While researching potential investments, I found Nexora Labs funding records. The company was in deep trouble, burning through cash faster than they could secure new funds. They'd pitched to dozens of venture capital firms, but their debt-to-revenue ratio scared off most serious players. That's when I realized I had a decision to make. I could save Robert's company with an anonymous investment, or I could let it collapse. The businessman in me saw the potential payoff. The son-in-law in me saw something else entirely. I began the due diligence process, keeping my identity hidden behind layers of corporate entities. Robert would never suspect that his potential savior was sitting at his dinner table, enduring his insults, watching his daughter stay silent. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago at Alina's birthday dinner. We were at Robert's house, and he'd invited his brother-in-law, Harold, a heart surgeon who loved boasting about his vacation home in Aspen. Harold just got a new yacht, Robert declared as Alina cut her cake, 40 feet long. Cost more than most folks earn in 5 years. Harold chuckled and slapped my shoulder. What about you, Samuel? Any big purchases lately? New car, vacation property? I should have seen it coming. Robert's eyes gleamed with that familiar spark, signaling he was about to strike. Samuel doesn't do those kinds of purchases, he said, his voice dripping with mock pity. He's more of a practical guy, right, Samuel? Alina squeezed my hand under the table, a silent plea to stay calm, but Robert wasn't done. Let's be real here. My daughter is a brilliant scientist. She's published in top journals, speaks at global conferences. She could have married anyone, a surgeon, a lawyer, someone with real potential. Instead, she settled for, he waved his hand vaguely toward me. Well, we all make mistakes. The room went still. Alina's hand went slack in mine. Harold stared at his cake like it was the most captivating thing he'd ever seen. Robert sat back with a smug grin, waiting for my response. I looked at Alina, really looked at her. Her face was flushed, not with anger at her father's words, but with embarrassment for me, for being married to someone her father deemed inferior. That's when it hit me. This wasn't going to change. Alina wasn't going to defend me because, deep down, she agreed with him. At least enough to stay quiet, enough to let him tear me down in front of her family. I stood slowly, placed my napkin on the table, and looked straight at Robert. You're absolutely right, I said. She does deserve better. I kissed Alina on the forehead, grabbed my coat, and walked out. Behind me, I heard Alina call my name, but I didn't look back. I had work to do. The drive home gave me time to reflect. For months, I'd been preparing a $15 million investment package for Nexora Labs, a deal that would save Robert's company and secure his future. The paperwork was complete, waiting only for my signature. I pulled into my driveway, sat in the car for 10 minutes, and made my choice. I wasn't going to sign those papers. Instead, I was going to do something far more satisfying. I was going to let Robert Kellerman discover what it felt like to need someone he considered a nobody. The next morning, I called my attorney, James Morrison, and asked him to prepare 3 documents: a formal withdrawal of investment interest in Nexora Labs, a termination notice for the pending funding agreement, and a confidentiality release that would allow me to disclose my identity as the anonymous investor. Are you sure about this, Samuel? James asked during our meeting. You've spent months on the due diligence. The investment fundamentals are solid despite the family drama. I'm sure, I said. Sometimes the best move is the one you don't make. By noon, everything was ready. James would deliver the withdrawal notice to Nexora Labs at precisely 10 a.m. the next day. I wanted Robert to have a full day to panic before he realized what had happened. That evening, Alina came home around 8 p.m. She'd been staying at her sister's since the birthday dinner, and her red eyes told me she'd been crying. We need to talk, she said, settling into the chair across from me in our living room. Okay, my dad called me today. He's worried he went too far at the dinner. I nearly laughed. Worried? He wants to apologize. Maybe we could have dinner this weekend, just the 3 of us. Start fresh. I studied her face, searching for any hint that she grasped what had really happened. But Alina thought this was about bruised egos and hurt feelings. She had no idea her father had just insulted the one person who could save his company. Alina, I said carefully, how long have you been embarrassed by me? The question startled her. What? I'm not embarrassed. You've never once told your father to stop attacking me, not once in 3 years. He doesn't mean it. He's just protective. He called me a useless nobody in front of your whole family. You stayed silent. Alina's eyes welled up. I didn't know what to say. He gets so upset when people challenge him. So you chose his feelings over my respect. That's not fair. But it was fair, and we both knew it. Alina had made her choice long ago. Every time she stayed quiet, every time she made excuses for her father, she was choosing him over her husband. I love you, she said, which only made it worse. I know you do, but love isn't enough if you won't stand up for it. She left an hour later, and I knew she wouldn't really come back. Even if we stayed married, Even if we went to therapy and worked through our issues, there would always be a part of her that saw me through her father's lens. The next morning, I woke up early and drove to my office. At exactly 10 a.m., I called James to confirm the withdrawal notice had been delivered to Nexora Labs. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. "Samuel?" Alina's voice trembled. "Something's happened. Dad's company just lost their main investor. $15 million. He's falling apart. I'm sorry to hear that. The lawyers won't tell him who backed out. They said it was an anonymous investment group, but now they're citing breach of confidentiality terms. Dad's talking about bankruptcy." I stayed quiet, listening to her uneven breathing. "Samuel, I know you work in finance. Could you maybe ask around? See if anyone knows anything about this investment group." The irony was almost too perfect. She was asking me to help find the investor who could save her father, unaware she was speaking to him. "I'll see what I can do," I said. After hanging up, I drafted 2 text messages and scheduled them to be sent the next morning. One would go to Alina, the other to Robert. Both would arrive at exactly 10 a.m. alongside a third message from James Morrison. "By tomorrow afternoon, everyone would know exactly who they'd been dealing with, so is your father. The message will come from me, confirming everything I just explained." "Samuel, this doesn't add up," Alina said, her voice unsteady. "If you have that kind of wealth, why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't need you to know, and because I wanted to see how your family would treat someone they thought was beneath them. So this is what? Some kind of experiment? No. It was meant to be an investment. Right until your father called me a useless nobody in front of your whole family and you stayed silent." Alina's voice broke as she started to cry. "I should have stood up for you. I know that. But Samuel, this is my father's life. His company, you can't ruin it just because your pride was wounded. This isn't about my pride, Alina. It's about respect. And accountability. Please don't do this. We can fix this. I'll talk to him. I'll make him say sorry. It's too late for apologies." At exactly 10 a.m., my phone pinged with a notification that both texts had been sent. Alina's phone buzzed at the same moment. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Samuel, please, I'm begging you, don't destroy my father." "I'm not destroying him, Alina. I'm letting him face the results of his own decisions. This is heartless. What's heartless is watching your husband get torn apart for 3 years and never once stepping in to stop it." Alina hung up. 5 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was Robert, shouting before I could even speak. "You think this is a game? You think you can ruin my company because I bruised your ego? Mr. Kellerman, I think you've misread the situation. I've misread nothing. Alina told me everything. You're the investor. 23 people work for me, Samuel. 23 families rely on this company. You're ready to wipe them all out because I said some things you didn't like. Actually, Mr. Kellerman, I'm ready to let your company rise or fall on its own merits, without my money keeping it afloat." We had an agreement. We had a preliminary deal that I chose not to finalize. No laws were broken. No contracts were violated. Robert went quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost broken. "What do you want?" "Nothing, Mr. Kellerman. I don't want anything from you. There has to be something, money, an apology, name it. I want you to know what it feels like to depend on someone you think is beneath you." I ended the call and powered off my phone. It was done. 3 days later, Alina filed for divorce. She came to the house while I was at the office and packed her belongings, leaving only a note on the kitchen counter. The note was 2 pages long, but its message was clear. She couldn't stay married to someone who would intentionally harm her family. What she didn't mention was that she'd also cut ties with her father. I learned this from Patricia Webb, who'd heard it from another former Nexora Labs employee. Alina had confronted Robert about his treatment of me, and when he tried to defend his actions, she laid into him about his poor business choices, his mistreatment of his research team, and his years of verbal attacks. According to Patricia, the argument ended with Alina telling her father that he'd ruined her marriage and her career, and that she never wanted to speak to him again. Robert had called her 17 times since then. She hadn't picked up once. Within a week, word of Nexora Labs' financial struggles spread through the biotech industry. 2 more potential investors backed out, spooked by the company's debt load and the sudden loss of their primary funding source. Robert had to let go of 8 employees and shut down his secondary research lab. A local business magazine published an article about the company's troubles, highlighting the mysterious withdrawal of their lead investor. Robert declined to comment, but the piece quoted several former employees who described a company plagued by leadership failures and misguided strategies. By the end of the month, Robert had listed his house for sale, and was liquidating his personal assets to keep the company afloat. The country club membership was gone. The vacation home in Vale was gone. Everything was being sold to buy time. I drove by his house one afternoon and saw him in the front yard pulling weeds from a garden his landscaping crew used to maintain. He looked older, diminished somehow, like a man who'd finally run out of people to point the finger at. 6 months later, I got word that Nexora Labs had filed for bankruptcy. Robert had found a buyer for some of their research assets, but the company itself was done. The remaining staff were either laid off or hired by the acquiring firm. Robert had taken a job as a consultant for a larger biotech company, working out of a small office in a strip mall near the airport. The man who'd spent years preaching to me about success and ambition was now commuting to the kind of nondescript office he'd once ridiculed. Alina never contacted me directly, but mutual friends told me she'd taken a role at a research institute in California. She was thriving, publishing papers and speaking at conferences again. She'd rediscovered her confidence in science, even if she'd never found it in our marriage. I sold the house in Denver and relocated to Portland, where I opened a new office for Amberland Ventures. The change of environment was refreshing, and the Pacific Northwest's vibrant tech scene offered plenty of investment opportunities. I never heard from Robert again, but I didn't need to. The business journals kept me informed of his downfall. Every failed project, every missed opportunity, every time someone passed on his ventures because of his reputation for poor judgment. Robert Kellerman had learned what it meant to be overlooked, dismissed, and deemed insignificant by those who held his future in their hands. He discovered that respect wasn't something you could demand or inherit. It was something you earned through how you treated others, especially when you thought they had no power to fight back. Sometimes the best justice is simply letting someone face the natural consequences of their own actions, and sometimes the most insignificant person in the room turns out to be the one holding all the cards.